What would happen in your construction business if you didn't have to show up to the job site every single morning just to get your crew started? You didn't have to walk through exactly where they're going to start, what tools they needed to bring, how they needed to prep, what they needed to prep, how they needed to do the job, what the scope of the work is. All of those details that take up hours and hours of your time every single morning. What if you didn't actually have to do that because you had systems in place? That is where one of my clients came to me with. He was frustrated that he spends 3 hours every single morning with his crew explaining what tools they need to bring, what the scope of the job is, what type of product they're going to use, what type of technique they're going to use, where they're going to start, how they're going to start, what needs to be prepped. All these questions have to be answered for his crew to get going. And so he ends up spending the majority of the morning with his crew, getting them on the right track. And I asked him, well, if we took away this problem and you didn't have to show up every single morning for the first 3 hours of the day, getting your team off to a good start, what would you do with your time? And he said, well, I would be able to meet with more clients. I would be able to grow my business. I'd be able to put different systems in place or different processes in place to actually go farther faster and not just be stuck on the job site all the time. And so we sat down, and this exact SOP is what we came up with in about 15 minutes. I literally have not edited it all, and you can see what 15 minutes on a mastermind call will do for your business. Now, he was able to take this SOP and add a little bit more to it, critique it a little bit, look back at his notes, see if it was complete, and then implement it in his business. So this is just the rough draft, but I want you to see how a SOP or a standard operating procedure gets formed throughout a business. And when you create an SOP, you actually create a lot of simplicity and clarity throughout the process. And I will show that to you here. If we haven't met yet, I'm Liz Chisholm, and I help contractors just like yourself grow and scale their businesses through systems and processes. This is the first 15 minutes that you need to do for any type of process. And it's really just the brainstorming, get it on paper and figure it out from there process. So let's dive right in, and I'll show you this SOP that we created in literally just 15 minutes. So the first part of the process is that his entire crew meets at the warehouse to load up the trailer and get everything ready. Most of the time their jobs are pretty far away, and they all pile into company vehicles at the warehouse and move on from there. Now, the owner has to be there to share his list that he's created the night before to his crew. Now, one of the things that we put into place is using Google Keep to create a simple checklist that his crew can use every morning, so they know exactly what tools they need to bring, what chemicals they need to bring, what supplies they need to bring for that particular job, and they're ready to go. And he doesn't actually have to be on site with them. They just look at the checklist, load up the trailers, and they're on their way. Next, there was a list of tools that we created. This one's not as thorough as the one that he ended up creating later as he looked back at his notes and looked through his warehouse and kind of assessed his trailers and that type of thing. But one of the things that he made sure that he did is mark all of his tools with a label so they knew exactly whose tools were whose. And he had a separate list for the different types of jobs he had. So depending on what they were doing that day, he would have a list of tools that they needed to make sure that they loaded onto the trailers and got to the job site. Now, like I mentioned, most of these job sites were about an hour away. And so you really want to make sure that this checklist is complete and comprehensive so that no tools are left in the warehouse. Now, prior to working with me, everything was either in his head, like most owners, or it was on a pad of paper that was always with him. So we were able to translate this into an actual checklist that could be used by his crew without him needing to be present. Next, he made sure everything's got fuel, made sure their gas tanks are full. They've got a couple of different types of trailers and equipment. So they've got diesel and gas. So one of the next steps in his process is getting fuel, making sure that everything is ready to go so that he can be prepared on the job site. This process is doing great for him. So why change it? So we just left it as is. Now, the next thing that he does is he walks through the job site with his entire crew. And he is training a couple of guys. So obviously he can't just hand them this piece of paper and expect them to know what to do. But this step-by-step process will be key in having them understand exactly what scope to do, where to start, and that type of thing. So one of the biggest things for him, because he does the spray foam, he does insulation, he does fiberglass, and everything in between, he has to start in a specific spot of the house and move his way towards some other spot. Now, when I kept on asking him questions, he kept on saying, well, it depends. Well, it depends. Well, it depends. That was one of the key phrases that can keep owners stuck with being inside their business instead of working on their business and actually operating their business as a business. So as I dug further, I actually figured out where they needed to start on every single job. And there was only a few start places. You either start at the farthest house, the farthest part of the house, and you work your way towards the front, or you start in the house that's the most cleared and do that first and then move everything to that spot and then continue. And so there's really only a couple of ways, but when you as the owner have done this for so many years, it's hard to understand what your process is until somebody like me comes along and starts pulling the information out from you. And this is what I talk about in another video about quadrant 3 is all the systems stuck in your head and how do you get them out on paper, or how do you get them communicated to your team so that they can actually do what you need them to do and they're not just trying to mind read all the time. So we walked through the best areas to start. And then we talked about, okay, what is the process for X amount of inches of foam with batting and so on and so forth. And so we really figured out that there are only 3 processes in his business. And so we have them here. We either have the bats, we have the spray foam, or we have the blowing, and they're all different trailers and there's different processes for each and there's different tool lists for each, like I mentioned before. And so we were able to go through and really decide, okay, if it's this type of process, what do we do? If it's this type of process, what do we do? And so as you can see, we've narrowed it down to very concise list of this is what needs to happen, this is how it needs to happen, and so on and so forth. And then we created a list down here of the information a crew needs to know. And so we went through all the problems that could arise. Now, obviously, this is not all the problems, but this is a good start to where it is. So this entire SOP was built in only 15 minutes. And the way it was built is that I asked the questions, he answered them, and I typed. And it is the fastest way to get an SOP done and get all that information out of your head and really see what you're working with. Understand how your systems and processes work together, and then where those bottlenecks are that you can actually free up time. So this process, he took home and he modified it a little bit, looked through his warehouse, looked at his trailers, made sure his tool lists were all accurate, made sure his checklists that he's used in the past were all in here. And then all he's got to do is implement this into his business, and he can save himself 3 hours every morning. This is what we do on a weekly basis inside my program to help you profitably grow your business and put in the systems and processes necessary to get you out of the day-to-day operations. So if you want to save yourself 3 hours every morning, if you want to start making more profit, if you want to actually not be feeling like you're pulled in 1,001 directions, then just message me and let's get connected and let's grow your business.